is the maiden edition of this podcast. I am Sonyalu Jumo, and I have a co-host here.
Hello, my name is Amolola Pedro. I'll be co-hosting the podcast alongside Juwon Soyalu.
All right. Thanks a lot. So here we'll be having conversations specifically relating to the labor movements, the working class consciousness, issues around gender oppression, social justice, and generally issues that affect governance. We want to specially appreciate the Frederick Bastifong, Nigeria office, for supporting this project, specifically this podcast. And yeah, we have an interesting personality here today. Yeah, it's an interesting personality.
Very
right?
interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, he's history personified. He is a labor scholar. And he's a seasoned trade unionist. He was, to start with, because he's one time this, one time that.
One time that,
So
format
there are
this,
so
format
many.
that.
If we start introducing him
Can
now,
I exhaust the title?
so let's just do this more that we know. He was former student union leader at the University of Ife, student union.
Then University
of Ife. Now Oba University, Obafemi Awolowo University.
It looks like this is a sibling of Obafemi Awolowo University people.
Yeah, alumni reunion.
That's nice.
All right. So at the time, her guest was a student union parliamentarian, and later he became the general secretary of the Patriotic Youth Movement of Nigeria. And there's something interesting about that organization, that is the PYMN. It was the organization that actually founded NAS. Wow. Which means that he, alongside few other student leaders of their time in the 70s, they traveled around the nook and crannies of this country, different campuses, and they were meeting with their peers during the days of the formation. It was their discussion that actually led to the formation of the NAS. Yes, and it was this same NAS that they founded that chased away the military. Well, that is just by the wayside. He is also, as we said earlier, he's a trade unionist, so he was also former General Secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Yeah, I'm sure everyone is already taking a guess. Already. And there is something quite important, an important area of history. Because at the time he was General Secretary of the NLC, that was when we had this big Occupy Nigeria protest.
Said to be the biggest
recent
times.
Yeah, that's actually the biggest uprising, in recent history. Of us, that is aside other struggles like NSAS and BADGov. But at that time, that was the biggest resistance, and actually the biggest resistance against the government of Jonathan. So as General Secretary of the NLC, was practically at the center of that struggle, Occupy Nigeria. So, let's welcome Comrade Owei.
Comrade Owei.
Thank you very much.
Is there any way we can clap?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
We are excited to have you on this episode of the podcast. Yeah. We believe that your presence with us would foster meaningful conversations, and then our audience would know that all of these titles are not just for mouth only.
No be for mouth.
No be for mouth.
Very for mouth. So, comrade, speaking exactly from your biography, you were former General Secretary of the NLC, acting General Secretary, if I'm correct. And it was during your time was when we had this Occupy Nigeria protest. Please, how did you, I want you to tell us in details how you organized that resistance.
Well, it was something that was organized generally by labor movements, and there were spontaneous organizers. In fact, before the NLC, all we did was to give the Jonathan administration an ultimatum, 3-4 days. And before the ultimatum expired, there were already protests in places like Kwara. People had even been shot at the Kwara library area. There had been protests by students in Kano. They had occupied parts of Kano before the NLC's ultimatum expired. So it was a momentum that nobody could stop. Yeah, and in my view, it's been the biggest mass movement or demonstration in Nigerian history. We had the one of 1945 general strike, the 1964 general strike. We had the June 12th. I was involved in June 12th. I was a coordinator of the June 12th protests. So I knew all those protests and strikes, and the strikes under Adams Oshiomhole, it was the biggest. I mean, people were cooking on the streets. Ikorodu Road, people were cooking. And they will cook, and the food will be ready, and they will serve people. On the road. People will bring mattresses, and you can still see this in videos, in television. They bring mattresses on the road and sleep in places like Lagos. In some places, we almost lost control. If in Kano, we actually did. Because our, part of the problem was that our chair, the NLC chair in Kano, Dangugua, was abducted by the SSS stupidly at a rally. And so people chased them and got him, released, and that led to a lot of problems. So people were angry, and they showed that anger. Yeah.
So, but I want you to take us to the nitty-gritty of exactly how NLC actually organized.
Actually, we've been talking about fuel things. We had organized strikes in 2000, in 2001, in 2003, 2003, 2004, 2005, when that ushered in the President Yaradua. And so this, we already had some experience. We had the movement of people, various societal organizations, who had formed coalition with the Nigeria with the Labour. We called it LASCO, Labour and Civil Society Organization. So we are students. In fact, secondary school students who also joined. So it was, people were tired and were angry.
So it cuts across almost all the
everywhere. And every state, every city went on that protest for 8-9 days. Every city in this country.
Wow.
None was spared.
Yeah.
So before you go, I know you're itching to ask a question.
Yeah.
So, but there is an aspect that I want to poke in a little bit. Recently there have been so many social media comments relating to, for instance, under Tinubu, under Buhari, cost of fuel had gone haywire. As a matter of fact, marketers are saying they want to start selling fuel at 1,000 naira. So the economy is particularly bad, far worse than it was under the government of Jonathan. So that some people are beginning to tell us that maybe we should apologize to Jonathan, and perhaps NLC's struggle against Jonathan, the Occupy Nigeria 2012, was misguided. What's your reaction to this?
Well, basically, we own this country, we Nigerians. And people like Jonathan, like Tinubu, came out to beg us to vote for them so they can serve us. So they are our servants. And no master will go about apologizing or begging the servant, especially when the master was right and is right. Basically, we have oil in this country. And part of the major problems we have about oil in this country is that we do not refine the products we sell. So we simply sell crude oil, make some money and share. That's not how to run any government or any society. You have a country like Norway that had oil, some years after we did, and they save part of that money. Today they have over $1 trillion, savings. We spent everything and we're indebted. So we have a right to tell our leaders to lead us aright or do something better, go and do something better. So we have every right and duty to tell President Jonathan that his position was wrong. And we did this in a scientific manner also. For instance, Okonjo-Iweala, who was the finance minister, said you could, if you imported a liter of fuel, it came to 145 naira per liter. And we asked her, Supposing that same field you're talking about, we are refining the element in Port Harcourt, how much will it cost? She didn't know. And the government did not know. And we had the answer, 40 naira. 40 naira per liter. And so when I see all these Dangote people dancing, we're just joking. I mean, if truly you refine petroleum products locally and you want to sell to us, why will you go to court to say nobody should import petroleum products? Because yours should be cheaper.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because when you import petroleum products, you get it. First, you are buying at international rates. There's freight, there's insurance, there's demurrage, there's MPA fees, NIMASA fees. And so if you put all these fees together, they're cheaper than what you are producing in Lagos, then there's fraud. And that's the problem. So you have 600,000 barrels per day, and you cannot supply Nigeria. You want to supply Cameroon. And then the NNPC will play pranks. Oh, we are going to start refining Port Harcourt today, tomorrow, worry. We are not serious. And so we have to tell the government, you have to be serious to govern us. It's a very basic thing. Even if you take, undergraduate doing BSc, they will run the economy better than what we're doing. We are saying.
So you're saying you don't regret organizing the resistance?
It's not about regret, it's our duty. It's our duty to ensure that this country is run in a proper manner. And we have to stand by it.
Okay, so lastly, on this said on Jonathan, lastly on there were, as a matter of fact, there was a paper, I think a magazine, that described the Occupy Nigeria as revolution postponed. Yes, and there have been many Nigerians who felt that perhaps the fact that Labour called off the 8-day strike was quite untimely and was not in line with the mood of Nigerians. How do you react to this? Because especially when the demand of NLC was that it should be reversed to 65 naira, but it did not happen, but the strike was called off.
Well, you see, when you go on an action, you must, what do you want to achieve? And the way we are going, the government said we're going to overthrow it, but that's not the first time. Obasanjo also said we're going to overthrow him. That there's going to be change in terms of the government. And we didn't have any alternative in place. You get it? So if you force the government to the point that it falls, what do you replace it with? You get it? I know the vice president then was there, but was he an alternative? Was the Senate president an alternative? These cowboys running around the streets doing traffic work in Abuja and Lagos, from the barracks, are they an alternative? So we got to a point where we asked ourselves, what do we do at this point? And the Jonathan government had said there was an attempt to remove it, to overthrow it during that protest. And they decided that the armed forces should take over the streets and kill anybody. That was a decision the government took.
Yeah, I remember.
And so we had to ask ourselves, is this something we can afford? After leading the people for 8 days, should we confront the soldiers that have been put on the roads? So it was only in a few places that we put that into this, like in Lagos. You get it? Where we went and our people were, at the point our people went after the soldiers and the soldiers took over and over the streets. There was even one of the men commanding them at that point, other soldiers to shoot on the Ikorodu Road, and the soldiers refused. The man who was also commander said, please put it down in writing. Give me a note that you asked me to shoot these people. No, it's true. So we had to ask ourselves, do we want a reduction? If the government says, okay, we've agreed on a reduction, should we go ahead or stay? At that time, the government wanted 97 naira. Yeah. So, I don't think it was a sellout. It was a tactical retreat that we had to carry out, knowing that it's possible to come out again if necessary. Don't ask me why it has not been necessary so far.
Because I was actually coming to that. I was coming to ask you if it's necessary now, or we have arrived at our destination. And then we have the way to go. Comrade, building on what you said earlier about the involvement and the impact of the NLC particularly in the Occupy Nigeria protests, I want to ask, these days we read a lot about how there is a new idea in people's head that the labor unions are useless now. When you go on social media, you read a lot of things about the NLC, particularly, especially when it comes to, taking the front lead in addressing matters that happen in the country. So you then tend to wonder what happened between this period that you mentioned and what we currently experience at the moment. So I wanted to know if you could give us a brief history of the trade unions. How did the trade unions begin? Why did it begin? Where, when? Who were the, actors in that formation of the trade union? What was the reason? Why did you think at the time that we need to have labor unions and trade unions across the country?
There are a number of questions. They are loaded.
Very loaded, though.
But let me start from whether the labor movement, trade unions have become useless or not. If they have become useless, then people will not still be calling on them to lead them. The trade unions and the labor movement generally, they remain the most potent force we have in Nigeria that can mobilize us for anything. There is no other group or party that can do that. So it's in our interest to build that movement. But I agree with you that there has been a degeneration. I agree with you, especially from 2015. But this Joe Ajero administration has been better than what we used to have. Better. You may not be satisfied, but it's been better. Hopefully things may change. But my knowledge of the trade union movement is that we may further degenerate because more and more the whole thing about having an ideological position, the whole thing about workers being the bosses, not the labor leaders, the whole thing about the emphasis on money, has eroded the Nigerian psyche. So you have very few people who can stand on their own and talk without being told, oh boy, come on, you said be part of this thing now. So we have that. But coming to the trade unions, when Lagos was taken over in 1861 by the British, they set up some type of clerical department. And later the maritime, then we had the railways that came later. So those people, by the 19th century, had come together to protest against the British. And it was a strike in the 19th century. But the first formal trade union that we had was the Southern Nigeria Civil Service, which was established on August 1912. But within a few years, a number of unions came up, particularly the Railway Union, that was led by a man called Michael Imodu, who today remains the best labor leader we've ever produced, and we still call him labor leader number one.
Yes.
So those people fought the British. They wanted, because in those days, if you're a white man, you had a higher salary than the black man. So they fought all that. They fought racism. They fought for African unity. They fought against even racial discrimination as far away as US, because they were Pan-Africanists. And they also ensured that whatever they did collectively. So when you want to take a decision, you took decisions collectively. For instance, in those days, it was easy to call a rally of all workers in Lagos and take a decision. And once that decision is taken, it was binding. Yeah. So we had that kind of movement. And when the trade unions came together in 1943, it was called the Trade Union Congress. One interesting thing about that was that the trade unions were separate individual organizations. But then there was a man called N.S. Ikoli. He was a journalist, an editor, and he was president of the Nigerian Youth Movement, NYM. He decided to call a meeting. He wasn't a journalist, I mean, he wasn't a trade unionist, but he decided to call a meeting of all trade unions in the country to say, look, the way the British are going, they will destroy us. And then it was during the Second World War, and the British had brought various rules, to ensure that workers could not come together. So he called the meeting. And every trade union in this country attended that meeting. So they established the Trade Union Congress,
What year again?
That was in
1943. A journalist.
A journalist, yes. He was
journalist
president of the
like-
Nigerian Youth Movement. N.S. Ikoli.
N.S. Ikoli.
Yes, you can Google him.
Yes.
So that's what you had. Now, one interesting thing about that movement was that there's a man called Reverend Rason Kuti, who was the principal of Abeokuta Grammar School. He had been the principal of Ijebu-Ode Grammar School before. He brought his students together to establish a student body, the first student union in the country, the Nigerian Union of Students, NUS. Something interesting about the NUS and the TUC was that the NUS was now saying, look, you are fathers, you have to do something about colonialism. So they called a meeting of groups. So as a result of that, the NUS, the TUC, and Abba Makoli's party, Democratic Party, came together, three of them, to call a meeting of all organizations and bodies in Nigeria at the Global Hall. That meeting then ended up establishing the NCNC, the National Council of Nigerian Cameroons. Nigerian Cameroons, because in those days, part of Cameroon were part of Nigeria. You get it? So that's how, the NCNC was. So a lot of labor leaders, belong to the NCNC. And they ran elections. The people like Arupopola, Debola, they were in the state assemblies. They ran for elections and won elections. Gugu Chu in Zeribe, yeah. So most of them, so you find in those days that the labor movement belonged to the NCNC, not the action group or anything.
Not the action group. Yeah. Thank you very much, comrade. So this would lead me to another question. Considering how the labor movement started, like the journalist you mentioned, it just goes to show how the media is also involved in nation building and how we cannot separate all of these sectors away from one
I'm a journalist
another.
myself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't
Yes.
take that away.
Yes.
Yeah,
The media also has to be
And I
involved.
think
so I was a
Awolowo
journalist.
was Awolowo too even ran the news outlets.
Which one?
Chief Awolowo.
Awolowo was he was one of the founders of the Road Transport Union. And then in that 1943, when the TUC was established, he was one of the members, elected into the executive council, yeah. And he was the editor of the Worker, which was the organ of the TUC, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, comrade, considering the impact of the labor unions, the trade unions so far, was there a time or were there times where the trade unions faced a serious repression, which shook the unions themselves and they almost doubted why they exist? Was there any
Repression
time like
is part of, as a part of our history.
that?
First, when you confront people like the colonialists, they have to fight. You get it? So let me give you an example of repression under the colonial system. When the Second World War broke out, the government decided that that is the colonial government, all its enemies was detained. So one of the people detained was Michael Imodum. He used to live in Butemeta, so they went there, they captured him. He was a prisoner of war. And they went to dump him in Benin prison.
Prisoner of war for being a trade unionist.
For being a trade unionist in Nigeria who did not support colonialism. So they captured him and took him to Benin prisons and kept him there. They thought they could keep him for long. But then there was a revolt in Benin prisons because Imodu told the prisoners that the white prisoners were sleeping on beds and mattresses and you were sleeping on floor. And then the food difference. So there was a revolt in the prisons. And so the government knew they had made a mistake. That the only thing they could do with Imodu was to go and isolate him. So they took him to his town to put him in one housing district for him to stay alone. Only for them to find out that whenever the farmers were passing every morning, he was talking with them and was mobilizing them. So that's another why. So finally, the war ended the Second World War ended in 1945, and Imodu was released, and he came, and Imodu was put in a train that stopped in various parts of the country as he was coming. You get it? Until he got to Lagos, where the nationalists were waiting. So he had Imodu on. You had people like Chu in Zeribe. In fact, that's a very serious one. He was one of those student leaders who protested against the British. Google Chu in Zeribe. And he became the general secretary of the telecommunication workers. You know, unfortunately, when the Civil War was beginning, he was one of those who thought Nigeria should not be broken up. He was Igbo, but he insisted. So he stayed in Lagos. So soldiers went to his office around Western Avenue to arrest him. And that's the last they saw of him.
Wow.
The last thing was that
Died. Disappeared.
some people claim they saw him in Kirikiri prison and he broke his head. So that's So up till now, nobody knew what exactly happened.
Just like Dadiata.
Yes.
We don't know what happened.
They just disappeared.
What's disappeared?
Who is that?
Dadiata.
Okay.
We've been looking for Dadiata.
So that happened to he was a leading trade unionist. There are a number of them. There was Ndukaize, who was jailed by the British. Because Ndukaize looked at it to say, look, if we are going to have a new Nigeria, we must have graduates, we must have people who are competent to run administration. So he decided to train Nigerians. And they could not be trained in Nigeria in any case, because in any case, he didn't have any university. But in 1948, when you had the University College Ibadan. So he sent Nigerians outside for scholarship. In those days, the socialists were the people who could get scholarship. But he couldn't get passports because the British don't give you passports.
To travel to a socialist country.
Yeah. To even give you a passport in the first place.
Oh.
You must have the reason why you have to get a passport. So what he did was to do his own Nigerian passport, which was genuine, and send the students to Britain to go to a phony school. I mean, they went through British immigration. The passports are genuine. And they sent them to Czechoslovakia and other countries, East Germany. So he was, and then they caught him, so he was one of those. So you had a lot of people who sacrificed a lot in this country. Trade unionists. Recently, you have the people like Franco Kori, you had a number of them. In the 60s, you have people like Aban. There were three trade unionists in those days, 64. During the 64 general strike, who thought that the government should be overthrown. And they went and planned to overthrow the government.
Oh, there was actually a strike by the trade unions to overthrow the
In 1964, there was a general strike, for a new minimum wage. When the thing got hot, some trade unions decided to overthrow the government. And they actually planned the coup.
A very recent gist about Babangida is, his recently published book, where he publicly acknowledged where he annulled the June 12th election, which was considered the freest and fairest election of the country. So we've been reading, a lot of people are saying, oh, he has pleaded for forgiveness. He has repented. What more do we want? A lot of people have been preaching forgiveness in the Nigerian media space. So I would like to know what is your reaction to this big announcement, even though it's not announcement to you, of course.
That the man should be forgiven.
Yes, judging by him coming out publicly to acknowledge it.
As a matter of fact, in addition, he claimed during his book presentation that forces beyond him, was responsible for the annulment of the election. Do you also agree with some of these assertions?
I think the good thing about Babangida is that we gave him another pension of 17 billion naira. Free. You get it? For people who destroyed this country, we should be in jail.
17 billion
Yeah. We should
in
be
hours.
in jail. Because they destroyed this country. Look, after the annulment, assuming he was against it, let us assume, why did he send the armed forces against the people?
Uh,
The main man Babangida sent against the June 12 protesters was Abacha. If he claimed Abacha was the one that did that, he then said he sent Abacha and they massacred people in this country. So people like that should be in
Forgiven.
life imprisonment.
Oh, okay.
Nigeria is not a religious body.
Exactly.
Forgiveness belongs to God.
To God.
It is not our business.
it's not our business.
At all.
Yes.
It's
You know.
not.
Yes.
It's not our business.
We have no problem with him being forgiven, but it's
No, by
responsibility
that,
can
of God.
repent.
God
That's
has the
fine.
democratic right to forgive him. But it's not our own.
It's not our own duty. Thank you very much, comrade. So I wanted to also make reference, your generation of trade unionists, God willing, you would still live longer, but we cannot ignore the fact that the new generation of workers are quite young, very younger. Somebody like Juwon, is a trade unionist.
Quota. Why do you use quote and unquote for?
Because I'm not sure you are.
Which generation does Juwon belong to?
I don't even.
Well, at least I'm younger than you.
Well. So, comrade, I want to make reference to the young workers training network of the FES. You would realize that we still have a lot of young workers in our trade unions. But something that stands out is that a lot of young workers at the moment do not seem to show interest in trade union activities. You don't find them at the front line. They are not actually interested in the trade union activities. So when the older generation leaves, what happens to trade unions? How do we get young workers?
The young workers will take over.
Oh.
Look, you see, the thing is that these young people, they're in a better position than any generation ever. In those days, when you want to organize a strike or a protest in the country, you have to hold meetings, especially that the military will announce one venue and go to another venue because you could be arrested. Or in this one, we were arrested. You have to go and print posters, and you didn't have much. You couldn't use the radio. The radio was under the government, even if it's private sector. A lot of things. Now, all those mobilization, all those costs, it just the phone in my pocket.
Yes. A WhatsApp message would be
simple. Go study what's happened under the NSAS. How those guys mobilized.
Yeah, we are here, comrade.
Incredible.
How you guys?
How we guys?
Yes. Incredible. When I saw Juwon in Lagos, I said, okay, so I know this generation. No, but seriously, you see, all those money for posters, and in those days when we do posters in Lagos, to carry it to the north, to carry it to the east. No. All this thing you are doing,
graphic design.
1 second.
It's out.
1 second is distributed also. You get it? So they are in a better position, and I think they will be better unionists. And so what the FES is doing, the Federal Stephen is doing, is to bring those people to be conscious of themselves, to know what they are coming from the trade union. So they are there. So it's not as if they are being manufactured. No, they are there already. So what do you do to bring them, to mobilize them, and ensure that they run a better system for all of us? And that's why I say the trade unions are still very relevant, because you have them establishing youth movements. You get it?
Yes.
Who eventually will take over. So for my generation, whether I would like it or not, we'll go.
Yeah, so there is something I want to also going by this since we're having conversations about our generation. During the NSAS,
which our generation?
no, since we are having
Which generation are you?
about generation, since we are having, since we are having conversation about generations.
Okay.
No, am I ready? I'm not ready to die. I feel I don't go.
Yes. Okay.
All right, so that's on the lighter note come with. So, speaking about generations, during the NSAS, there are certain sentence or statements that were quite popular, and it is statements like our parents did nothing, as the generation before us did nothing, that we are coconut heads, we are not like our father. So implying that generation before us, your generation was docile. Is that true? Are you docile?
Yes, we were docile to the point that we went on the streets and hundreds of us were shot and we still went out the next day.
Very docile.
No, that's
July. No, wait.
people are in their bush.
July 6, 1993. Like I said, I was coordinator of the CD around that time, and that's why I addressed the press. And we were also working with the NMA. There was Boniface Oyediran, who helped us organize the. We went about in Lagos on that day. We collected, there were a total of 118 corpses, 118 people shot dead from the back. And we had to ask ourselves, should we continue or not? So we said, if we don't continue, we will be defeated. So we went back to the streets the very next day and for subsequent days. Is there a generation that was cowardly? Yeah.
No.
We faced the guns. We faced bullets. And we did not run. When you take a person like Ganifa Ibi, you know how many times he was he was detained or imprisoned? I don't know. You take a person like Beko, you go and Beko Rason Kuti, you go and see him now, and then the next time, somebody send you a message, Beko has been arrested, then you go and look for him. And you don't know where you find him. Because you could have taken him to any part. And there are a number of people like that. Baba Mojola, a number of people. We had, I'm not even talking about my generation. We are young compared to that generation. These are people, these are courageous people. You know what it is to say you want to organize a national conference like, Aka did in September 1990. And the government says they are going to jail 5 years each. And Aka say, yes, I'm ready, I'm a lawyer, I'm going to jail. So those are so I'm not even talking about my generation, I'm talking about the generation before us. Those guys, if we're as courageous as them, we will have done a lot in this country. These guys are guys who fought for this country. So we are just trying to catch up. And I'm sure the millennial generation like you are trying to catch up with us. And the Gen Zs are still trying to find out what is going on.
The Gen Zs are taking over.
I don't think they are trying to find out.
They're taking over.
Gen Zs are...
So the point I'm making seriously is that end SARS and end bad governance shows that you can't take people for granted. Especially the youths.
Yes.
You can't take them for granted for anything. I was shocked at the level of mobilization. I mean, I used to tell myself I'm an organizer, mass organizer. I was known in those days as the commander of the streets of Lagos. You get it? We look like Biodarem. But when I saw these guys in action, I knew how to go and learn. I needed to go back to school.
So the young people have retired you.
Sorry?
The young people, we have retired you.
No. They inspired me.
Oh, yeah.
So Comrade is saying that young people can do it even better.
Yeah.
than how it used to be. And
Far,
then
far
we need
better.
to erase the notion that older generations
No,
those are-
Well, that's
they
not
don't.
what the practice says.
that's
Yes,
not
at all.
correct. I mean, history is there to
Look, if you know what the
prove us
military
right.
was, if you know what the military was, to force them out of power,
Hmm.
eh?
Hmm.
It's I mean, it's you
That
go to
was
war.
that was some,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
that's
yes.
big deal.
Yes.
That's
I mean,
big
if you
deal.
dealt with the
And
military,
to have forced the military out
crazy.
of power, to have drove
Colonial
away the
masters.
colonialists, that's some crazy
No,
shit.
no, no. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. That's no docile generation. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, comrade,
Yeah, thank
for
you so much for
honoring our invitation. We hope that when we call again in the future, you are available to respond to us. While we close this episode, we'd also like to appreciate the Frederick about Steve Tong for supporting this initiative.
Thank you so much, FES.
Thank you, FES.
Yeah.
See you on the next episode. Bye.